December 19th, 1944, near Stoumont, Belgium. The snow fell in silent sheets as Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann surveyed the ghostly remains of the American position. The battlefield still whispered with the echo of departing engines, the retreating Americans leaving behind a landscape thick with abandoned potential. Every shattered helmet, frozen ration, and overturned fuel drum painted a portrait of sudden withdrawal and calculated sacrifice, revealing a retreat made not from fear, but from overwhelming design. The German patrol moved cautiously through the stillness, their boots crunching over the thin ice covering spent shell casings and discarded ammunition boxes. Hartmann ordered his men to sweep the perimeter, though his mind had already become lost in the scale of what lay before them. Beyond the snowbank, rows of supply vehicles stood unguarded, each filled with crates marked in block letters, U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. Within minutes, German soldiers pried open the containers, their gloved hands trembling as they uncovered mountains of food, fuel, and medical stores unimaginable to men who had been fighting on starvation rations for months. There were cigarettes from Virginia, chocolate from Pennsylvania, canned meat from Chicago, and pristine uniforms still wrapped in protective waxed paper. The smell of abundance filled the air, mingling with the metallic scent of oil and frozen exhaust. Hartmann felt an emotion he could not define, a collision of disbelief, envy, and quiet dread. The sheer volume of material stood in mocking contrast to the exhausted German columns crawling behind them, their tanks starving for gasoline, their soldiers half frozen, their supply lines collapsing under Allied air power. What he saw was not merely luxury, it was power quantified in tons and gallons, measured by the precision of an enemy whose factories never slept. He realized that this depot was not an exception, but a symbol of something far larger. Each crate represented a system, the invisible machinery of an industrial civilization capable of projecting comfort even into chaos. The Americans had not merely brought war, they had brought their nation's full productive capacity to the battlefield, turning every mile advanced into a test of endurance no army could match. In that moment, under the dim Belgian sky, the myth of German superiority cracked irreparably. For Hartmann and his men, this discovery was not triumph but revelation, a chilling reminder that valor could not refuel tanks, and courage could not manufacture replacement parts. The true war was being won elsewhere, in factories across the ocean. The first light crept through the Ardennes haze as Hartmann's men continued their systematic inspection of the American depot. Wooden crates towered like fortifications of industry, each label testifying to a supply chain that seemed endless in both reach and reliability. A corporal from Aachen lifted a steel ration tin and muttered disbelief, his voice trembling as he read its expiration date extending months beyond Germany's expected endurance. They found lubricants for engines, winterized fuel additives, and precision machine tools, each stamped with serial numbers unique to distant American factories. The Germans, hardened by deprivation, handled every object with reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. Their army had been taught to conquer through discipline and efficiency, yet here lay proof that their greatest weapon, organization, had been surpassed. Hartmann's adjutant, Feldwebel Kruger, scribbled hurried notes, counting quantities that defied comprehension. One warehouse alone held enough gasoline to sustain a panzer regiment for an entire week, a quantity German logisticians had deemed impossible to transport through shattered roads and Allied air interdiction. What had been designed as a simple resupply operation now stood as an industrial exhibition unmatched in modern warfare. Outside, the wind cut through the broken trees, carrying the faint rumble of distant artillery. Somewhere to the east, Piper's column struggled to refuel stalled tanks, while here fuel overflowed, untouched. The irony struck Hartmann like a physical blow, each observation deepening his realization that the Wehrmacht's advance existed in defiance of logistical reality. The American retreat, once seen as disorderly, now revealed itself as deliberate, part of a war doctrine driven by inexhaustible support rather than desperate improvisation. Every truck abandoned along the road was a decoy of convenience, not a symbol of weakness, but a measured act of calculation. Hartmann ordered photographs to be taken with a captured Leica camera, intending to report his findings when contact with headquarters resumed. Yet even as the shutter clicked, he understood that these images would not alter fate. The contrast between German scarcity and American plenty was too vast, too entrenched, to be undone by bravery alone. What they had discovered was not simply a logistical advantage, but a civilization's absolute commitment to mechanized supremacy. In the pale dawn, surrounded by abundance that mocked hunger, Hartmann recognized that his generation's fight had already been lost. Not in the forests of Belgium, but in the assembly lines of Detroit and Pittsburgh. Stoumont lay cloaked beneath a gray horizon as Hartmann's patrol advanced deeper into the captured depot complex. The once modest Belgian railway yard had been transformed into a logistical nerve center, its sidings lined with freight cars brimming with supplies that seemed inexhaustible. Steam rose from fractured pipes, mingling with the mist, as the Germans moved between colossal stacks of ammunition crates and maintenance parts. Each crate was marked with printed codes, detailed inventories, and shipment origins stretching back across the Atlantic Ocean. The precision stunned them. Every component, from tank track bolts to field radios, was catalogued and sealed in protective packaging designed to survive months of transit. The Americans had not only supplied their armies, they had built a logistical organism capable of feeding, fueling, and repairing itself under fire. Hartmann examined a manifest listing shipments from New York, Philadelphia, and Norfolk, realizing that the very scale of transoceanic coordination defied all pre-war European understanding. This was not improvisation. This was perfection executed through machinery, mathematics, and manpower on a continental scale. A young grenadier compared the contents of an American repair kit to his own worn field tools and laughed bitterly. German industry, now fragmented under Allied bombing, could no longer sustain production cycles for such precision. Each missing tool represented another delay, another tank immobilized by shortage rather than enemy action. The soldiers felt awe mixed with despair as they witnessed how their enemy's wealth had been converted into movement, where every bullet, tire, and uniform converged seamlessly at the front line. Hartmann realized that American warfare operated on an entirely different philosophy, one grounded in excess, standardization, and continuous replenishment. Where German logistics relied on resourcefulness and improvisation, the Americans relied on numbers so vast that no setback could cripple them. Each abandoned warehouse symbolized confidence in their ability to rebuild faster than the enemy could destroy. The discovery forced Hartmann to confront a terrifying truth. The Reich's industrial miracle had been outpaced by a system that turned abundance into strategy. As the patrol regrouped beside the railway siding, they heard distant engines approaching through the fog. Allied air superiority had grounded much of Germany's transport. Yet here, even retreating Americans had left locomotives fueled and ready. Hartmann stared at the quiet machinery and understood that this was the real battlefield, an invisible war of factories, freighters, and assembly lines. The weapons were secondary. Victory belonged to whoever could outproduce exhaustion itself. On the morning of December 20th, 1944, the remnants of Kampfgruppe Piper moved cautiously through the Ardennes mist toward their next objective. The frozen roadways had become graveyards of mechanical exhaustion, littered with stalled tanks, shattered trucks, and improvised fuel drums drained to vapors. German radio intercepts spoke of American convoys retreating in orderly fashion, yet Hartmann now understood such withdrawals were tactical maneuvers crafted to exploit mobility as a weapon. The Americans had redefined warfare through logistics, turning transportation itself into an instrument of deception and endurance. Piper's men had long relied on speed and aggression to overwhelm numerically superior enemies, but here, momentum meant vulnerability. The discovery at Stoumont revealed a truth that no field manual could ignore. Superior tactics could not compensate for logistical starvation. Each burned-out panther symbolized both mechanical excellence and strategic futility, for every kilometer advanced demanded fuel that no longer existed. Reports from other units confirmed similar findings. American depots captured, consumed, and quickly replaced by new ones materializing seemingly out of thin air. The enemy's supply web was elastic, able to stretch and reform faster than the German spearhead could penetrate. In desperation, Hartmann's superiors ordered the collection of all captured fuel, yet even full drums could not match the pace of consumption. Engineers improvised siphon systems from abandoned vehicles, while officers measured distances not by terrain, but by gasoline remaining in their tanks. American units, aware of German dependency, began destroying key stores preemptively, leaving behind deceptive decoys that lured valuable time and resources. The Germans adapted their tactics. Patrols scouted not only for enemy positions, but for sustenance in the form of captured supply. Combat planning turned from strategy to survival. As Hartmann's patrol linked up with Piper's command column near La Glaise, discussions centered not on victory, but endurance. The once invincible panzer divisions now moved at a crawl, harassed from above by P-47 Thunderbolts and shadowed by advancing infantry. Hartmann noted that even captured American vehicles proved incompatible with German fueling systems, forcing men to drain aviation gasoline through improvised filters. What had begun as an offensive had become an education in the futility of numerical inferiority. That night, as fires from ruined tanks illuminated the valley, Hartmann wrote in his field journal that the Americans fought like engineers, not soldiers. Their warfare was arithmetic, calculated through tonnage, replacement rates, and fuel density. He realized adaptation was meaningless against an enemy who had already mastered the equation of total war. By December 21, 1944, the psychological weight of discovery began to crush the men of Hartmann's patrol as visibly as the cold. The initial astonishment that had swept through them at Stoumont now evolved into a quiet, spreading despair, impossible to disguise beneath military discipline. Soldiers who once spoke of victory with conviction now stared in silence, their faith in German invincibility eroding with every recollection of American abundance. The depot's memory haunted them, not as triumph, but as a revelation too immense to reconcile with propaganda. Around makeshift fires, they discussed the contrast between their own hardship and the enemy's apparent limitless provision. One grenadier described the captured American winter coats as softer than anything issued to the Wehrmacht in years, while another confessed disbelief at the abundance of canned fruit and fresh cigarettes. Their commanders had long warned that Allied morale was weakening under the strain of prolonged war, yet the evidence before them suggested an opposite truth. These Americans fought not merely to survive, but to preserve a lifestyle, a form of warfare intertwined with comfort and mechanical reliability. Rumors spread through the battalion lines that Germany could never replace what had been lost, while America could rebuild entire armies before spring. Such talk, whispered in darkness, carried more weight than official orders. Hartmann recognized that morale itself had become a battlefield, and here the Americans had already achieved dominance without firing a shot. The understanding that their enemy possessed infinite resources transformed courage into resignation, bravery into endurance without belief. Each soldier, though outwardly steadfast, bore an invisible fracture within. Even Piper's veteran tank crews, men hardened by years on the Eastern Front, could not ignore the evidence. They spoke less of tactical brilliance and more of industrial disparity, of how each Tiger tank represented the labor of thousands while the Americans produced theirs by the hour. Hartmann sensed an unspoken acknowledgement spreading through his unit, that they were witnessing the twilight of the army they had idolized. The pride of the Reich had been undermined not through battlefield defeat but through an understanding of its own limitations. When darkness fell across the Ardennes, Hartmann wrote another entry in his notebook. "We are fighting a civilization, not an army," he recorded with trembling handwriting. The war, he realized, had become psychological long before the shooting stopped, and belief itself was the final resource Germany could no longer afford. By December 22, 1944, German High Command attempted to reinterpret the realities unfolding within the Ardennes, disguising desperation beneath the language of strategic recalibration. Field reports from units like Piper's confirmed the magnitude of logistical shortfall, yet headquarters continued issuing directives grounded in fantasy rather than feasibility. Hitler's insistence that captured American fuel would sustain the offensive had now become a delusion, repeated through radio channels more for morale than operational guidance. Officers such as Hartmann recognized that tactical excellence could no longer substitute industrial inadequacy, for the war's trajectory had already been defined by arithmetic, not audacity. Orders circulated demanding rapid seizure of Allied depots near Liège, though reconnaissance flights revealed heavy air activity preventing any meaningful approach. Commanders adapted by fragmenting units into smaller, more flexible formations intended to scavenge resources from scattered enemy positions. What emerged was not innovation, but organized desperation, a structure designed to survive, not to conquer. Meanwhile, American logistical planners continued executing resupply operations with astonishing precision, using Red Ball Express convoys that operated day and night across secured routes extending hundreds of miles. Their system, refined through discipline rather than heroism, made German adaptability irrelevant before it even began. Hartmann attended a briefing near L'Église, where senior officers debated whether to destroy disabled tanks or attempt recovery using captured fuel. The conversation exposed their collective exhaustion. Men trained to maneuver divisions now negotiated over liters of gasoline. Across the lines, Allied intelligence already anticipated German fuel shortages, instructing units to abandon stores only when demolition could be confirmed. It was a war of spreadsheets as much as soldiers, fought through calculations of consumption, replacement, and endurance. Every decision made in Berlin echoed into the Ardennes as an illusion, colliding with the arithmetic certainty of Allied production capacity. Even propaganda broadcasts, once thunderous with certainty, grew defensive. Berlin radio spoke of temporary setbacks, while frontline troops listened in silence, aware the truth could no longer be disguised. Hartmann's understanding deepened with every intercepted American report. Their efficiency was not accidental, but cultural, born from institutions that treated supply as destiny. In contrast, Germany's tactical brilliance had become a relic, glorious yet obsolete, unable to sustain itself against mechanized continuity. That night, beneath a fractured moon, Hartmann realized that strategy itself had changed meaning. No longer an art of maneuvers or courage, it had evolved into logistics, cold, mathematical, and absolute. Germany had mastered the former, yet America had conquered the latter. By December 23, 1944, the skies above the Ardennes no longer belonged to Germany, for Allied aircraft returned with relentless precision and unchallenged dominance. The temporary fog that had cloaked the German advance lifted, revealing columns of stalled armor exposed across open terrain. Hartmann's patrol watched helplessly as formations of P-47 Thunderbolts swept overhead, their engines resonating like mechanical thunder across the frozen valleys. Each strafing run carved through convoys already crippled by fuel exhaustion, transforming highways into graveyards of twisted steel and shattered ambition. The Luftwaffe attempted counteraction, yet its dwindling squadrons faced impossible odds: fuel scarcity, pilot shortages, and airfields under constant bombardment. The once proud fighter wings that had ruled European skies now functioned as shadows of memory, unable to maintain sorties longer than minutes before retreating to conserve what remained. Allied air supremacy became not merely tactical but existential, sealing the Wehrmacht's isolation by cutting every lifeline of movement, supply, and hope. For Hartmann and his men, survival now depended not on courage, but concealment. American reconnaissance aircraft operated with mathematical regularity, photographing every crossroad, fuel cache, and bridgehead. Within hours, artillery followed those images with surgical accuracy, obliterating anything resembling organization. The depot at Stoumont, once a symbol of revelation, now became a death trap for any German force attempting to extract its treasures. Trucks burned until nightfall, painting the horizon with a glow visible for miles. The Americans had turned the skies into a constant instrument of calculation, each bombing pattern reflecting logistical intelligence so refined it erased guesswork entirely. Hartmann observed how air superiority amplified the enemy's logistical perfection. Every destroyed German vehicle demanded a replacement that could not exist, while every damaged American convoy was instantly restored through replacement shipments. He understood that dominance of the air multiplied every industrial advantage on the ground, making resistance a matter of arithmetic futility. Even the sound of engines became psychological warfare, a reminder that the Reich no longer controlled time or space within the battlefield. As dusk settled, Hartmann's surviving men hid beneath the charred remains of their transport vehicles. The night smelled of fuel, smoke, and despair. Above them, the faint hum of distant aircraft echoed like a promise of inevitable collapse. Hartmann realized that the war's future would not be written in trenches or tank duels, but in the sky, where industry and innovation had found their most absolute expression of power. By December 26, 1944, the momentum that had once propelled the German advance through the Ardennes disintegrated under the combined weight of exhaustion and arithmetic impossibility. The offensive, conceived as a lightning strike toward Antwerp, had devolved into fragmented survival across forests choked with abandoned machinery. Columns of Panther and Tiger tanks stood motionless along frozen roads, their engines silent for want of fuel. Officers scribbled ration figures that no longer aligned with reality, their calculations rendered meaningless by the simple absence of gasoline. German units that had once advanced 30 miles daily now measured progress in meters, clawing for ground they could neither hold nor retreat from. Communications between divisions faltered, not from enemy interference, but from power shortages and shattered infrastructure. The once precise coordination that defined Wehrmacht operations collapsed into isolated struggles for existence. Hartmann's reconnaissance detachment found itself cut off from headquarters, surviving on captured rations that symbolized both sustenance and humiliation. Every American tin opened reminded them of industrial defeat sealed long before the first shot of the campaign. American forces, reorganized and reinforced through flawless logistics, began counteroffensives that unfolded with mechanized inevitability. Truck convoys poured through newly cleared routes, delivering fuel, food, and ammunition faster than German command could comprehend. Artillery barrages shifted rhythmically across the front, synchronized by aerial observation and radio data networks that Germany could no longer match. Each engagement resembled less a contest of arms and more a demonstration of systemic endurance. The men at the front felt time itself turning against them. Days blended into endless sequences of withdrawal and destruction, where holding ground meant delaying collapse rather than achieving victory. Officers who once spoke of tactical brilliance now whispered of arithmetic deficits. Fuel ratios, replacement rates, artillery expenditure, all pointing toward extinction through depletion. Hartmann recorded in his field journal that his tank stood immobile for 72 hours, waiting for fuel that never arrived. His men burned American crates for warmth, their laughter hollow beneath the sound of distant engines returning. By the final week of December, the once grand offensive existed only on maps drawn in Berlin. On the ground, it had become a mosaic of stranded machines, frozen soldiers, and shattered dreams of triumph. For every yard gained, 10 were lost, not through battle but through mathematics, the precise, unfeeling computation of industrial superiority turning momentum into memory. By the first days of January 1945, the illusion of victory dissolved entirely, replaced by grim acknowledgement across the fragmented remnants of the Wehrmacht. Officers who once spoke with iron conviction now carried the weight of comprehension that no courage could redeem arithmetic imbalance. The American counteroffensive surged from Bastogne outward, supported by endless convoys that carved black scars of tire marks across the snowbound countryside. Every advancing Sherman tank symbolized the mechanized determination of a nation whose factories never slept. Hartmann's surviving detachment watched the sky filled once again with contrails, signaling that Allied air power had returned in overwhelming strength. Bombers roared overhead, targeting bridges, fuel depots, and columns that struggled to retreat through roads already clogged with wreckage. The Luftwaffe, crippled by shortages, could no longer respond with meaningful resistance. The Germans on the ground understood with painful clarity that the battle had transitioned from a contest of strategy to one of endurance, and they had none remaining. Captured documents and abandoned radios revealed chilling contrasts between enemy realities. American units reported daily resupply in tonnage surpassing entire German divisional needs. Field kitchens distributed fresh food, while medical stations overflowed with penicillin and plasma. The German wounded, lacking morphine or clean bandages, endured in silence, their suffering eclipsed only by disbelief at what abundance looked like in war. Hartmann recorded that the Americans possessed not just weapons but comfort, a psychological armor no training manual could replicate. As orders came to withdraw toward the German frontier, discipline fractured under despair. Men discarded equipment they could no longer carry, their boots soaked and spirits hollowed by defeat's inevitability. For every burned-out tank left behind, the enemy rolled forward another fueled and crewed within hours. The sound of engines replaced the echo of gunfire, marking the transition from offensive ambition to logistical collapse. Those who still believed in victory did so only from habit, not conviction. In the final days before retreat, Hartmann stood amid snow-laden ruins of a captured American depot once celebrated as a prize. Now it symbolized irony. The same abundance that had sustained the enemy had revealed Germany's fatal weakness. Around him lay opened crates, rusted fuel drums, and shattered dreams of a war already lost before it began. Recognition had come, not through surrender, but through realization that numbers, not bullets, had written history's verdict. When silence finally settled across the Ardennes, the snow-covered forests bore witness to the aftermath of an illusion destroyed by mathematics. What the German soldiers had uncovered within those abandoned American depots transcended material wealth. It was the blueprint of modern warfare's future. Hartmann, reflecting years later, wrote that no battlefield courage could counter an enemy whose power originated from assembly lines, not trenches. The sheer scale of what they found, fuel drums stacked like towers, food supplies measured by railway lengths, spare engines awaiting installation, transformed their understanding of war's foundation forever. The revelation spread quietly through surviving officers who later debriefed intelligence units, forming an unspoken consensus that Germany's defeat was industrial, not tactical. Historians would later calculate that by December 1944, American output of vehicles, weapons, and munitions exceeded the entire Axis combined. Every crate opened in Belgium symbolized not just logistical superiority, but ideological evolution, a war fought through factories, mathematics, and relentless standardization. The shock among German troops was less about enemy abundance and more about realizing how far behind their nation truly stood. For Hartmann's men, the psychological collapse began not with defeat in battle, but with comprehension of the impossible scale of opposition. Each ration tin, each fuel barrel, each spare uniform revealed that the Americans fought a different kind of war, one sustained by mechanical certainty rather than human endurance. Even their smallest depots represented an infrastructure so vast that destruction of one seemed meaningless. What the Germans once viewed as targets of opportunity now appeared as symbols of unattainable permanence. After the war, Allied analysts documented testimony from captured officers who described the depots as museums of inevitability. They spoke of realization dawning amid exhaustion, that Germany had not lost because its soldiers failed, but because its factories could never match their enemy's infinite rhythm. The American logistical system had redefined warfare itself, proving that victory was no longer won by courage alone, but by the industrial orchestration of nations. By the time spring arrived and Europe's snows melted, the legacy of that discovery lingered like a scar across every surviving witness. In the silent aftermath, Hartmann's recollection closed with haunting simplicity. We fought armies, they built them daily. The frozen depots of Belgium became monuments to an equation no bravery could alter, the unyielding truth that war in the modern age belonged not to heroes, but to production.